Hello, my name is John Pack. I'm the Vice Chair of the Carson City Republican Party. I'm here with Lucia Maloney, my colleague, and we're sitting down with Mayita Sanchez running for Carson City Supervisor Ward 3.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you for coming. So we've got your bio. Thank
Okay.
you for that.
Of course.
And when we post it online, we'll post that along with the internet.
Okay.
So people will have all your information right there. So
Awesome.
what inspired you to run and what qualifies you for this role?
That's a fantastic question. So it's funny because I've worked as a public administrator for about 10 years or so, a little bit over, and navigating, I think, state, federal, and local government, I've seen a lot of the challenges that we have when we're working within communities. I always joke and I tell folks it's always the same people at the same table having the same conversation over and over and over again, and it can become very disheartening, very overwhelming, especially as we're trying to tackle projects, because there's a lot of common needs that we have, within our communities. And so what really pushed me into this area, I think, was seeing that sometimes solutions are not brought to the table in a transparent way. And I understand, because you have too many hands in the cookie jar, it can get overwhelming. You're like, oh my gosh, you can't make everybody happy. Like, that's just the reality of governance. But at the same time, there is a way to do government in a transparent way, in a way that is representative of the majority of the folks, even if maybe not everyone is agreeable. But I think that, and this is the reason that I'm here, I think that with communication, with education, in the sense not like traditional education, but education and like, hey, let me explain this to you, or how can I tell this to you in a way that you might understand it that's different than maybe I explained it to you, because we all think differently, we all process information differently. Like, how can we explain these processes so that we understand how and why we got to this? And so working in this space, across these sectors, I'm like, I can try to be that person where I come in, I have this background, this lived experience where I've had to navigate these processes. I don't know what I'm doing. Hashtag public learning is what I say, but I'm learning in public, but why can't we all do that together? And so what's driven me to run is to be able to provide that conduit, that bridge basically between communities, where it's like, hey, well, okay, I understand that we all don't want Carson City to become the next Las Vegas, but we're growing. What does that look like? What does this mean? And so that's my running. I'm trying to move from a place of idea to influence, so I can ask appropriate questions to hopefully be able to implement good policy in favor of the majority of folks. Yeah.
What do you see as the most pressing challenges currently facing Carson City, and how do you prioritize addressing them?
Yeah, so, it's interesting. Carson City is growing quite a bit, and you probably hear this from everyone. And I just rabbit holed down data centers the other day, and I'm like, okay, so, because there's a lot of grief around data centers and development, and, and then we see growth here. There's a lot of grief around, City Hall and the investment and downtown, and, well, what about the rest of Carson City? And there's a concern with seniors being priced out of their homes. We have a lack of workforce housing in Carson City, but then people look at the relationships between local government and maybe those individuals that are coming in and buying up property to create homes that maybe are or not. You know what I mean? So I think that those are some of the pressing issues here in Carson City that are a concern to the citizens, to the folks that are here, or to the people that potentially want to either move into Carson City to raise their families, because Carson City is pretty awesome, right? So housing for me is a primary concern. Access to affordable housing. I think infrastructure is a concern as well, because as we have growth in Carson City, we have to be very thoughtful and intentional about infrastructure. Can we maintain, right? Can we sustain what we have, and can we maintain any further growth in the future? And we have to think past our nose. We can't just think about 5 years from now. We need to think about 20, 30, 40 years down the road. What impact might we accidentally create with the decisions that we make today? And so looking at data centers, for example, I was like, okay, well, talking about closed loop systems, and I don't have a position on anything, and I'm not speaking to any side of that, but it really highlights, again, the need to have intentional conversations, to ask the right questions, to really understand the process, and really understand, okay, well, who's got skin in the game? when you're making these big decisions. And that's what I think leadership should be asking those questions. Like, all right, well, who gets what? And then making sure that the right people are getting what it is that they need and people aren't getting left behind. Yeah.
What strategies would you implement to improve public safety and reduce crime in Carson City?
Yeah. So I think that with idle hands, what is it? What's the
One is idle hands are the devil's
Ooh,
playground.
right? So, I mean, just taking that into consideration, you know, one thing that I know that Carson City has tried to do, and I think that we could probably improve on, is outdoor spaces. You know, mental health is a big thing. So, you know, but what is mental health? Mental health is having a place for kids to go hang out, you know, senior citizens to go out. I know suicide rate here has exceeded what we've had 13 suicides this year. It's exceeded what we had the previous year. So where does that play into safety? Again, I know that's probably not traditional safety, but in the same sense, how safe do people feel within their communities and how do you improve that? And I think investing back into the community by being able to provide resources. So I know that the board was talking about, oh, well, we want to invest in like daycare for folks, you know? So small things like that, after school community resources, you know, parks, walking trails, making sure that people can ride their bikes safely through Carson City for outdoor exercise. And that's just a small piece of it. I mean, also making sure that public officials are appropriately funded, our police, our sheriff, all those services that we do have, making sure that we're investing into them, be that monetarily or also retention-wise in the actual individual that's doing the work, because we want to make sure that our officers are a part of the community and are, you know, welcome. And I think we do a really good job already here in Carson City. I'm a fan of the sheriff's office, you know, juvenile probation as well, juvenile services. You know, there's a lot of really great resources and programs. So just making sure that we're sustaining and we're not cutting any of that, I guess, in regards to funding.
And since you brought up the sheriff, how would
Yeah.
you work with the sheriff's office and other law enforcement partners to make all
No,
this happen?
that's a great question. I think just talking to them. You know, I've heard the current sheriff, you know, the one that's running for re-election, you know, I've heard him speak at different events, and, you know, he seems like a cool guy. He's been doing this for a long time, as what I can tell. But anyone that's sitting in the position, whoever that might be, they're going to understand the landscape, right? So again, having these conversations with folks like, hey, okay, well, what do you see? What does the data show? Because they track all this information. What's the community saying? How do we bring that all together? You know, are there any gaps in what's being presented? How can we maybe fill those gaps? Can we fill the gaps? Do we want to fill the gaps? And just really have heart-to-hearts. And it sounds so corny, but really that's what it is. Again, sitting down, having a conversation, being honest with the reality, trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we either close or fix and repair, thinking long-term as well, and then coming back to reassess. So, I don't know. It sounds simple. It's not. It's much more nuanced, but I think it can be just a phone call to start things.
Moving on to housing and infrastructure.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about how you would approach the issue of affordable housing in Carson City and what policies you would advocate for to support residents?
That's fantastic. And I'm actually doing a deep dive because I've had so many questions come in about general improvement districts and tax infrastructure, zoning, you know, just looking at our zoning maps, you know, what's zoned as commercial, what's zoned as mixed housing, what's, you know. So I think that, one, I have a lot more to learn, so I'm not gonna lie. But I think that to keep housing affordable, we have to look at context. We have to look at external factors, right? Because there's external factors outside of local government that we might not have a tight control on. Obviously, we can go advocate during legislative session, make sure that we're talking to the governor and, you know, contacts, you know, senator, you know, assembly, congressional folks, you know, to look at, okay, well, what policies are you all looking at that might potentially drive prices up? And I know right now it's kind of a hot mess, but there are ways for us to look at how, you know, how we're reallocating funding within local government to kind of cover what it is that we need to cover in order to not inflate housing prices. But I don't have a solid answer, but I do know that I have a lot of questions. to bring to the board and to local government and be like, okay, well, what is the reality? What are the options? What was exhausted? What hasn't been exhausted? Why wasn't this explored? And what I have found in public government, which isn't a bad thing, but what I have found is that it's so difficult to break away from status quo. It is so difficult to be like, hey, let's try that. They're like, no, we can't do that. I'm like, why? Because we can't. We just don't do that. I'm like, okay, but why? We just don't do that. But can we? Well, I guess. I was like, all right, well, why don't we see what's up? Like, why don't we try? Let's run a pilot. Let's see what it looks like. Maybe that doesn't work with housing necessarily, but that mindset where it's okay sometimes to kind of, take apart the Lego and put it back in a different way. You don't have to always follow the directions. You're still going to get a nice product out of it. Yeah.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the answer, it's okay.
Okay.
This isn't on my questionnaire, but
Yeah.
So the city did do a kind of a pilot project and did build affordable housing and workforce housing over off Bud Eye near airport.
Okay.
Right? Since opening, the sheriff's office it's hundreds of calls in the first year. They actually
Is it the apartments right there that have like no windows or anything? By the animal shelter?
By the animal shelter,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know.
So
that's my word. I live right across the street from
they
that.
actually call it, the sheriff's office refers to it as Little Gaza because the crime
Are
is
you
so horrible
serious?
and they're there multiple times a night.
That's so messed up.
So, well, it's not great, right?
Yeah.
So crime has been, I think, an unintended consequence, right?
Yeah.
If elected as supervisor, how would you sort of evaluate, since you mentioned pilot projects, how would you sort of evaluate pilot projects and what's your approach to course correction?
Yeah, so I think it's important to make sure that we don't correlate affordable housing with criminal behavior, right? So we have to take a look at, is this something that is a direct correlation or is this just a symptom of, again, what does that look like? Because we don't want to work in assumptions. And so just taking that into consideration, and you're right, I don't have an answer, but it would be interesting because I haven't been inside those units. Those units have no outdoor space. Have you all been inside one of those units? It's a long hallway with doors into the individual apartments. There's no, if we catch on fire, you can't go outside. And it feels very like claustrophobic. I'm like, oh my God, I would not be a fan of living there. So again, how are we supporting the reason that something bad happens, the reason that maybe sheriffs are called out? Is it domestic? Is it criminal, as in, someone is breaking the rules, or what law are they breaking? Is someone, trespassing? Like, I would have to see the data set. Like, okay, well, what exactly are they being called out for? Are a lot of folks that are there are low income and maybe don't have access to, I don't know, juvenile services? So maybe a kid is using a vape when he's not supposed to and he's broken probation. Is that the call that's coming out? Or is it because, a wife decided that she was upset and there was a domestic, abuse situation, that was what they were called out for. So in regards to affordable housing and workforce housing, I think that, it's important to have workforce housing. I think it's important that housing is affordable for communities. But again, what's that underlying current? Why is housing not affordable to everyone within our community? Why do I have to apply for, affordable housing? Like, why can't I have why isn't my wage livable? Like, why am I not making enough money to be able to pay a normal rent? You know what I mean? So I don't have an answer, but I think it's important to look at context and ask those questions again. I'm not going to keep coming back to that. I apologize, kind of. But again, I think it's important to make sure that we don't correlate and assume and just say, oh, well, because of this, Little Gaza issue, is that a reflection of all potential workforce affordable housing that comes in Carson City? And if it is, okay, well, do we need to maybe look at zoning and make sure that it's not such tight, close living quarters? Do we need to make sure that there's more outdoor space in those areas? Because there's no outdoor space out there. Do we need to make sure that maybe it's there's more access to resources? So those would be the questions that I would ask.
It's really helpful to hear your thought process. So thank you.
No, for sure.
To continue kind of in that vein of affordability and things that are expensive and what drives up costs, right? So as a supervisor, one of your roles would be to, I think you said, what is causing this increase?
Yeah.
I'm curious then to hear your thoughts on how illegal immigration is impacting those costs and what do you think the supervisor should do about that problem
Yeah.
and how to fix that, so that,
Yeah.
and what effect does that have on costs?
Yeah. So illegal immigration is interesting because it kind of flows away from local government in the sense, not to punt it to state and federal government, like you guys take care of that. But in regards to housing, I think that there are systems already in place in regards to being able to apply for affordable or public housing where there are limitations where you do have to prove documented citizenship already within, for those programs. So in order for you to be able to qualify, you need to be able to demonstrate that you are documented and you have entered legally. So I think maintaining those requirements, I think, is a good thing. I mean, it also affects our ability to receive federal funding, if we aren't able to validate and show. And I think that is one of the better ones of being able to document and show, like, hey, yeah, we're following all the rules. And so that's where I'm at with that. In regards to inflating prices, I don't know if it necessarily falls on a certain community. I would make the argument that it might fall on the realtors, on the developers that are coming in and purchasing, and then, pricing dependent on what maybe the general market is and not reflective of what the local market is. Yeah.
And I would agree that it's not all one sector.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah.
It's a component.
Yeah, totally.
Right. Okay. Historic preservation and economic development. So Carson is a little bit known for the historic downtown and cultural heritage.
Their trains.
Yeah.
My favorite.
How would you balance economic development but maintain the preservation of the local character?
That is such a good question. Honestly, so my dissertation is on public-private partnerships, and it honestly started with the thought about privatization. There's Mr. Lincoln. How much privatization is too much privatization? When does it become a bad thing? Or when is it potentially able to drive economic development in a way that benefits the community? Again, I think that it's important to look at who is benefiting from. So for me, who needs to benefit are my neighbors. Not that I have anything against developers, and I don't. I think it's important that developers come in with stakeholders in interest, or minds and interests in mind. Yeah. And I think that it's important to see, okay, well, if we're going to come in and you're going to give me this abatement, or you're going to give me this tax write-off, or you're going to give me, I'm going to be able to purchase this, with a discount in order for me to bring in my business or my development or whatever it is into Carson City, fantastic. Let's have that conversation. But what do my neighbors get in return? What does our community get in return? And I think that kind of pushes people to feel uncomfortable, but it's like at the same time, we make sure that we're able to really, what would be the word? Maintain the beauty of downtown Carson City, right? Because obviously, and we see the boom and fall of Carson, the capital here, because of legislative session. Those 6 months, everybody comes in and we're like, woohoo, we're rocking. And then we have the interim. We don't have that funding coming in. What do we do? And so, okay, well, how do we diversify and make sure that we're bringing in business and we're bringing in development, but at the same time honoring what it is that we have here already? So again, I've had conversations with so many folks where people are just like anti-growth, and then other people are just like, throw it all out, build skyscrapers. And it's like, okay, well, wait. Where is there somewhere in the middle? And again, it's so nuanced because you're sitting on a board, you're having these conversations, what happened with the state coming in and putting in their state offices, City Hall, mixed housing, where they want to do the different kind of things there in downtown Carson City. All of those could potentially be good ideas. Some of them are good ideas. Some of them I feel are, might not be the best idea, but at the same time, we're still growing. We're going to continue to grow. How do we make sure that the investments that are being made are not only on the benefit of the developer, but also on the benefit of the community that it's supposed to be benefiting?
Right.
Yeah.
One of the big issues in Carson City that people are coming to blows over, sort of, in a way, is roads.
Yeah.
And
the one that I just ran into the ditch the other day, my husband's like, "You're a woman." And I was like, "Dude, really?" I was so mad at him, but go ahead.
Yes. So, as a person who drives around, our roads, I think we could all agree, are in serious need of work.
Yeah.
And what specific improvements or changes then would you recommend to get that fixed.
Yeah, can I crack a joke, but I don't mean it. I'm just kidding. The roundabouts drive me nuts, but I get it. For road improvement, there's interesting ways that we could potentially tackle it. We don't want to, introduce new taxes in the sense because it's already...
Well, it got voted down.
Well, yeah, and, and if we keep... What would be the word? Keep beating the dead horse, taxes, obviously that's not a solution. So what are other solutions? One thing that I found interesting that I've, rabbit holed down is EV, electric vehicles. Okay, well, there's no taxes on EV. Is that something that, when there's taxes on everything else, why not EV? That's something to explore. Carson City, also federal funding. There's infrastructure development funding that's available and invested, capacity for Carson City to apply for and receive and manage that funding. That's something that I think needs to be looked at because I have a feeling that not all federal funding is being utilized in an effective way here in Carson City. So that would be something that I would explore. Yeah.
Water management and sustainability.
Okay.
Environmental concerns such as water management and sustainability are important in Nevada.
Yeah.
How would you address these issues locally, and are there any priorities that you have that are part of your platform?
So it's interesting because, like I said, I was going down the data center rabbit hole the other day. And so I was like, oh, I probably need to go tour the Water Reclamation Center. And I drove by the one that's up here off of, Kings Canyon. So if you know the contact, you should totally tell them to invite me. But but I think that there's lessons to be learned with what's happened in some of our communities in regards to, slow seeping because of mining. Mining's a big industry here in Carson City, or just all of Nevada for the most part. And so I think learning those lessons about what infrastructure was tried to be built or was built a little bit too late into the process. So then we were trying to fix things, and you know how it is. You let your things in your house kind of go to rot and you're like, I'll take care of that. What was a $200 job now becomes a multi-$1,000 job. You know what I mean? When you could have fixed it 5 years ago and it probably wouldn't have been such a big stink. So I think thinking about that when we talk about water conservation and reclamation here in Carson City and just in Nevada in general, I think it's very important to try to stay ahead of the curve. And I know that's a little bit challenging, especially given now with some of the new technology and, new development that's coming into our area. I think it's very important that we're asking those questions, updating regulations, and exploring what's old-fashioned and what needs to be hey, yeah, that didn't work the last time. Why don't we try to get ahead of the game this time? That'd probably be one of the things. And I mean, Carson City, Nevada is known to be one of the better states in regards to water, given Las Vegas and we live in the desert, right? So, but it's still a scarce resource, and so we want to make sure that we're able to maintain. Yeah. These are good questions.
What role should city government play in supporting local businesses and fostering economic growth?
I think they should be local business, come in. I'm a small business owner myself. Moving into the private sector, I own a boutique consulting firm. And so I work across different sectors, with nonprofit, state, local government, trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we provide services to our community in an effective way? Because government shouldn't do that, all of it. So we need to make sure that we have an environment that is welcoming to business. I think everyone should take entrepreneurial classes. You know what I mean? I'm a huge advocate. And I think that with that type of mindset where you're hey, how do we solve problems, which is business. Business is where is there a gap in the market and how do I fill the gap and make money off of it? Because that's what business is, right? I think having that mindset is fantastic because it's transferable. It's not only just making money, but okay, well, there's a need in the community. How do I make the community better? Oh, well, there's a need here. How do I make that better? So having that mindset, I think, is a critical skill that I think everyone should have. And then if you have an idea that you can monetize, heck yeah, bring it in. See how it goes.
And along those lines, is there anything in your career any specific incentive or program that you've seen work that you would like to consider here that we don't do now?
That we don't do now? I think we should have more Girl Scouts. I think that our workforce pipelines, I think WNC, Our elementary schools are, private sector, I think, are doing already a good job. Fan of apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships, that framework in both traditional and non-traditional trades. I think that, and that also helps with, training, livable wages, making sure that folks are able to support a family, buy a home. I think, I think just continuing to invest in that and trying to see where it is that we can better improve it.